two, I think the two things that I should say, I don't know if they're useful to know, is that the one place that I began to think, you know what, I definitely want to write this book about Britain now and about these issues. And one place I began was when I read a newspaper report in Gary's newspaper. Gary didn't write the report, but a few years ago, about that generation, the generation who are my father's generation, your father's generation, who are now dying, or who are in old people's homes, or having to enter this notion of an old people's home, a retirement home, a senior citizens facility, whatever you wish to call them, in England, which is a place, these are places that don't exist in the Caribbean, because you're taken into the bosom of the family. And now on a few islands they're beginning to spring up. But traditionally, the elders were taken into the bosom of the family. And I read on, and the thrust, the main narrative thrust of the piece was that in Coventry, in the Midlands, the local authority had to segregate these homes with black residents in one and white residents in the other, because even after 40 or 50 or sometimes 60 years of life in England, people of that generation still didn't want to die together. It was their kids who were playing soccer for England together, or playing for Arsenal together, or Man U. It was their grandchildren who were on the equivalent of American Idol in Britain, and, you know, hanging out and doing all the things that that generation do. The older generation carried that angst of migration from the 50s and hostilities that had been built up. So these people were not actually dying together. They weren't aging together and then gracefully passing on together. And that the council was complicit in this. Nobody was actually saying, oh, hang on a minute, we don't do segregation. So that moment really shocked me and made me feel that there was a hidden story about this so-called movement towards multiculturalism and multiracialism in England. We hear all the time about how it's true, London is the most multiracial city in Europe, Britain is the most multiracial country in Europe, etc. But there was clearly a hidden agenda there amongst that elder generation. So I became interested in figuring out how to write about somebody who was in the early winter of his life and had held all these memories and all these anxieties aside for many years. And then, of course, as I sort of indicated before, the problem then becomes aesthetic. The problem becomes about language, about how to do this, because a rush of language is a problem with grammar, with punctuation, with capturing the irrationality with which one remembers things. At certain ages, you don't remember in the right order. You make connections that don't make sense to anybody else. Somebody's listening, and you're, you know. So that became, that soon took over as a problem. And that's where I began. So the very first pages of the book were those pages.
Yes, yeah.
And then I had to go back and figure out how to frame it. I haven't reread it, but I'm teaching it. I don't think
it then.
No, he's not forgotten. I mean, I hope, I know exactly what you mean, but I don't think he's that forgotten, because he's one of the few guys, if I put him on the syllabus, I can just about scrape up some copies. I know what he means. No, I mean, Salmon's 10-page soliloquy at the end of The Lonely Londoners, which is clearly inspired by Joyce and Woolf, and it's clearly in conversation with modernism. I mean, with a kind of with a kind of interwar modernism, which Selbon and Harris and other West Indian writers of that generation were wildly in love with. You know, Selbon, I think, and that novel, I still think that's the greatest novel about migration published in Britain in the second half of the 20th century. That particular passage, of course, was something that I read when I was thinking about it, and you know, you're right to say, read it. I read it. I think it's, he's a model, he's a guide, and mentor. He shouldn't be forgotten, because linguistically what he did was astonishing in that book. It's what makes that book rise up above us. Sort of, I got off the boat in England and it was foggy and I felt miserable. It's the language. It's the language he employs. It's the language he employs which is in conversation, in a very profound conversation, with when Eliot talks about the unreal city. It's in conversation with Prufrock and with the wasteland. And with Sparrow, the kitchen.
We've got time for one more question.
Question, my answer is heartfelt. It's what I honestly believe. Every individual does what he or she can do. That's it. Every individual who perceives the reality behind what you're saying. First of all, if an individual perceives that reality, I'm relieved, because we're surrounded by people who don't see what you just articulated. But every individual brings to that question, or to challenge and engaging with that question, whatever they have at their disposal. I spent, as has Gary and other people in this room, I spent, certainly by now, at 51, I spent by far the majority of my life doing one thing, which is writing. Because I believe that it's a moral act. It's an act of imagining yourself into the mind of somebody who is not you, in the hope that the readers will also join me and imagine themselves into the lives of people who are not them, and thereby we understand people who are not us. We're prepared to give up time and spend time with people who are different from ourselves, to be curious about their lives, to be empathetic with the things that are affecting them, that are upsetting them, that are making them fall in and out of love, and to not judge them, and to understand that these are like people that we live with. That's all that I can do, or Bobby Antoni can do, or Gary can do, but there are people here who are teachers, who are social workers, who are librarians, who everybody brings to that question whatever artillery they have, you know, and then you just hope. You just hope.
Oh, that works.
That's